Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. Welcome to this auspicious occasion marking the start of our second century. I'm grateful to all of you joining us this afternoon. Welcome to all our distinguished guests, including the Right Worshipful Lord Mayor, Leicester Councillor George Cole. I'm delighted Hilary is here with some friends and family, members of the council, ex-members of the council, well-wishers of the university. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon. When I arrived 3 years ago, I remarked that I was conscious that I was standing on the shoulders of giants. In part, I was referring to a golden era at Leicester when it was visited by the late Queen. It was voted University of the Year by Times Higher. We won 2 Queen's Anniversary Prize, and we were riding high on league tables. That unparalleled period was the Burgess era and belonged to the longest-serving Vice-Chancellor in our 100-year history. Professor Sir Bob Burgess was the higher education leader who changed the face of Leicester. Today, we pay tribute to him, not just by naming the building after him, but by ensuring his legacy for striving for excellence continues and lives on. We sadly lost Sir Bob earlier this year. I had the privilege to speak with him. He was a remarkable man who left an indelible mark on those who met, and his impact still reverberates through this university. He had been closely involved with the development of this project, and we are honored that Hilary is here, a former colleague of ours as well, to perform the opening ceremony. The building we are unveiling today is our landmark teaching and learning center, with state-of-the-art lecture theaters, inspirational teaching rooms, media suite, and study areas. Over 4 stories, it boasts 2 large lecture theaters for a total of 850 students, and a range of flexible teaching spaces to support the delivery of world-class academic activities and promote collaborative learning. The top floor of this high-tech new learning space will be dedicated work smart space for our university staff. We have also sympathetically restored the Grade 2 listed Freeman's Cottages to include the new whole site reception for the city accommodation, alongside collaborative study spaces to encourage social learning. Sir Bob was affectionately known as Bob the Builder, reflecting the gusto with which he set about transforming the physical landscape of Leicester, as well as its fortunes. What we have built today in his name does his legacy proud. It is where generations of students will receive a transformative education and make an impact upon the world. The opening of this building today is part of a wider ceremony in which we have already named 7 accommodation blocks this morning. And later this afternoon, we will formally open the whole site. In a moment, I shall invite Hilary to say a few words and to open this building. This will be followed by remarks from Dr. Bridget Toll, whereafter we will hear the inaugural Sir Bob Burgess Memorial Lecture. I'm very grateful to our guest speakers, who will be introduced by Bridget Toll, and I look forward to their lecture. It was John F. Kennedy who said, "As we express our gratitude, we must never forget that the highest appreciation is not to utter the words, but to live by them." As we embark upon our second century, we commit to keeping alive the pursuit of excellence that Bob wove into the fabric of this university. His name lives on as a reminder that we can do better and that we will achieve more. His name was a byword for excellence and will remain an inspiration for generations to come. Thank you very much. I now invite Hilary to say a few words.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank the university and the Vice-Chancellor for the enormous honour of naming this wonderful building after Bob. He was delighted when he received the letter and saying it was going to happen, and he exclaimed, "They're going to name a building after me, and it's going to be a teaching and learning building." Well, that's just me, isn't it? They couldn't have chosen anything better. It has made me reflect on when Bob was first appointed as Vice-Chancellor, and he came home and said to me, "I think you'll like the house." Well, who couldn't not love living at Knighton Hall? Bob saw it as an immense privilege to be Vice-Chancellor of the University of Leicester, and we both appreciated the wonderful opportunity of living at Knighton Hall. Bob would regularly walk around the university campus to see how it could be improved, and we were both spurred on into developing our art collection through living at Knighton Hall, as it was such a fantastic environment to display art. There were 3 pictures in the house when we arrived. One was a picture of the centre of Leicester in the 1950s, which we discovered belonged to a Warwickshire art collection, so that had to be returned. One looked like a gloomy day in a wet woodland, and the other was a portrait of a very severe-looking military man that was hung in the dining room. And it was above the fireplace, and it glowered down upon all the diners. Well, Bob said it put him off his food, so that had to be found a home elsewhere in the university. If you've picked up a copy of the booklet, Bob in his own words, and started to read it, you'll have discovered that Bob came from a working class family. He grew up in a 2-up, 2-down terraced cottage with a lean-to kitchen built on the back and a toilet at the top of the garden. It was still like that when I went there in the 1970s. But when Bob's father realised he was going to get a daughter-in-law, he came home from the factory where he worked every lunchtime, and he dug the foundation floor for a bathroom. And then he went back to his factory work in the afternoon. So the need to work hard if you wanted to achieve anything in life was something that Bob learned very early. And while Bob was Vice-Chancellor at the University of Leicester, he also recognised the important role that every single person has to play, including caterers, porters, gardeners, cleaners, as well as the academic and professional staff, if a university is to be successful. And that was why when university departments were invited for drinks and canapes at Knighton Hall on summer evenings, it included everyone, administrators, secretarial staff, as well as the academics. And it was also behind the idea of the Christmas party that we gave each year, where I organised and served the food and Bob poured the drinks, as we wanted to find a way to thank all those people who'd worked at Knighton Hall during the year, in the gardens during the day, and those caterers who came and gave endless dinners at Knighton Hall in the evening and gave up their time so generously when often they'd worked all day in the university as well. When we came to Leicester, we certainly didn't expect to stay for 15 years. But Bob loved it all. He loved the hard work, as well as the privilege of getting to know so many wonderful people in the university, in the city, and in the wider Leicestershire community. So for me, this is a wonderful day, but it's also tinged with sadness. as I know Bob would have loved to be here, to walk around this fantastic building with its impressive lecture theatres, lavishly equipped seminar rooms, and he would greatly admire the WorkSmart Hub with its magnificent view across the city and beyond, even though he had very few IT skills himself. He was, though, given a very good idea of what it was like by his first chair of council, John Foster, who wrote a long letter to him describing it all in minute detail. I do know what Bob would want to say, and with a big smile on his face, to academic and professional staff who will work in his building, and to students who will study here, as well as to those who service and look after it, or to anyone who might just happen to wander through. Because I've heard him say it so many times to graduating students so many times before. Work hard, enjoy what you do, but most of all, have fun. Thank you.
It's my enormous pleasure now to invite Hilary to formally open Sir Bob Burgess Building. Dr. Bridget Toll, the former chair of the council, to say a few words and introduce the speakers.
Today, it is our honour to be here at the naming of this wonderful building named for Sir Bob Burgess. But it is our sadness that Bob is not here with us. I think you'd all want me to thank Hilary for being here today and for naming the building for Bob in his memory. So thank you very much. As Hilary has said, in many respects, this building reflects Bob's qualities and represents his beliefs, like the importance of higher education, personal study and research, and his priority in providing students with high-quality facilities. In fact, a strong theme of Bob's tenure as Vice-Chancellor was his working together with the presidents of the Students' Union. He regarded them as very important members of his senior team. And he listened to students, went to the Students' Union, sat down and listened to students. They shaped and informed his thinking. And our university investment program reflected that too. I had the good fortune of serving on the university's council for almost the entire period of Bob's 15 years as Vice-Chancellor. I was appointed to the council just a year after Bob started and served as treasurer and took over as chair the year before he retired. We worked together closely, and during this period, I came to see at first hand and to admire a leader with exceptional qualities. He enjoyed sharing his plans and aspirations for the university, listening to the opinions of a variety of people, both the students, as I mentioned, but also lay people, professional people, and the academics. And then he reached his conclusions. Under his guidance and through his great determination, Leicester excelled and moved upwards, both in league tables and in buildings. The nickname of Bob the Builder was totally correct. Many of us have memories of Bob in a hard hat and a yellow jacket. The photographs record each groundbreaking ceremony, and they show a progression from a simple spade to large, substantial, earth-moving equipment, with Bob, of course, at the controls. Being a VC does have some fun moments. The history and progress of this university is based on the work of outstanding individuals such as Dr. Astley Clark, Percy G., and Thomas Fielding Johnson, whose actions made such a difference. Today, we're adding Bob's name to that distinguished list. He changed the University of Leicester and set it on a trajectory to rank among the best. When the Times Higher chose Leicester as the University of the Year, they gave it a new strapline: elite without being elitist. In fact, this summed up both the university and its vice-chancellor. Bob totally identified with the university, which in turn totally reflected his qualities. With his vision, energy, and scholarship, he was a true citizen of change. Bob Burgess made a huge impact on the University of Leicester. Today, the Sir Bob Burgess building provides the opportunity for undergraduates and graduate students through higher education, personal study, and research to make a huge impact on their own lives. That is the outcome which I'm sure would have given Bob great satisfaction. I'm delighted that today we have together honored Bob's name. And now it's my honor to introduce the speakers for the inaugural Sir Bob Burgess Memorial Lecture, entitled Conversations with a Purpose, Bob Burgess and Sociology of Education. We have the benefit of not just one speaker, but three, all of whom have had an association with Bob. Our speakers are Professor Christina Hughes, Professor of Women and Gender Studies and founder and CEO of Women Space Leadership Limited. Professor John Goodwin, who is Professor of Sociology and Sociological Practice. And Professor Henrietta O'Connor, Pro-Vice Chancellor and Head of the College of Social Sciences, Arts and Humanities. So I now invite the speakers to give the inaugural Sir Bob Burgess Memorial Lecture.
I just want to say a huge, huge thank you for inviting me to talk about someone who has been so formative in my career since I was an undergraduate, which you will know is far too many years ago to want to remember, and certainly to talk about that time in my life up until my early career and how much I have to thank Bob for. So I thought I'd bring us and start by bringing us right to the present time, because every university at the moment is worrying about a certain thing with the acronym of TEF. And TEF, of course, has come back again in a slightly different format, and it is a way of measuring the excellence of teaching and learning. So I thought I'd put together a little word cloud just for you to have a flavour of some of the terms. And that word cloud is taken from the assessment criteria, which are labelled SE 1 to 7, student experience 1 to 7, and SO 1 to 6, student outcomes 1 to 6. And you can see how the word cloud has, of course, pulled out student, provider, learning gets a bit of a mention, and so on. Now, for me, whilst we can have a debate about the efficacy and the role of TEF, this kind of model is bureaucratising of teaching and learning. It breaks up teaching and learning into its component parts, SE 1 to 7, SO 1 to 6. It's also, for me, left brain dominant. It is a categorisation in a very rational, functional way. And what's missing, that for me should be in the absolute centre of that slide, is the alchemy of teaching and learning. The alchemy that comes from passion for your subject and incredible knowledge of your subject. And this is why, for me, if I was talking about Bob, and if you could enter an individual, not an institution, into TEF, he would be TEF Gold. Because he brought absolutely that passion and that knowledge. I met Bob as a second-year undergraduate at the University of Warwick, and he was teaching second-year qualitative methods, a required course. We had to do a methodological course. We could have done stats, we could have done qual. Gender, very typical, I went for the qualitative. Required courses are often the least popular because there's no choice, you have to do them. They're also the bread and butter of teaching. Actually, many academics do very rote teaching on very standardised required courses, Economics 101, for example. But not Bob. And I cannot really stress the impact that that course had on me as an academic, as a sociologist, and as a researcher. So certainly, and probably his teaching background, that programme of work ticked all the TEF boxes. It was really well organised. It was systematic. There was everything in there that you'd want to tick, tick, tick across those criteria. But when I sat in seminars, I was awestruck, absolutely awestruck, by any question any of my fellow students asked. Bob could point them in the direction of a resource or some evidence or whatever. He knew his field. It's one of the reasons why we're so concerned about research-informed teaching or research-led teaching or whatever the vernacular is. He knew his stuff. But also, he had a passion for it. He cared about it. He was engaged with it absolutely fully. And when you meet John in a moment, we'll reinforce this, but there were two foundational texts that I still have and that were so profound for me. So In the Field was one, and the other was the source book that I devoured. And what Bob did was introduce me to the notion of anthropology in your own backyard. And if you read the opening of In the Field, you will find a quote from Malinowski, the stereotypical anthropologist who goes away and studies, quote, exotic cultures somewhere. And then a quote from Sarah Delmont, an educationist. So studying your own backyard and using these tools, these techniques, these ways of thinking to understand what is absolutely around us in the here and now. So he introduced me to something called the Chicago School of Sociology, and I absolutely devoured the Jap roller, the hobo, the Polish peasant, and. These were textbooks that absolutely spoke to me and led me to be a lifelong methodologist. Now, these are just some of the YouTube things you can find on supervision these days. What supervisors say about PhD supervision: to my supervisor hates me. There is a mammoth amount of stuff now to enable academics to be good supervisors. When I started, that didn't exist. In fact, it was just about to happen. So first of all, if it hadn't been for Bob putting his hand on my shoulder and saying, you could do a PhD, there is not a chance I would have done one. Like Bob, I come from a working class background. I come from a council estate in Birmingham. I went to university as a mature student, not quite as mature as I am now, but in those days I was a mature student. And there is not a chance in the world I would have ever have thought I could have carried on. Get to university was one thing, be an academic was another. And it's down to Bob. I was the first cohort, amongst the first cohort of ESRC-funded students, SRC it was called then, where the regulations around completion rates were put in. And for those of you who don't know, it was because completion rates for PhDs were very low in the UK, and so those who were funded, university departments had to get a certain quota and a certain percentage. If they didn't get funding ever again, or for a period of time. That's an enormous weight, actually, to carry on your shoulders when you know there's 3 of you who have got ESRC funding. If one of you doesn't finish, you might be putting your department in jeopardy. So imagine how nervous I was when I had to tell Bob, halfway through my PhD, I was pregnant. I was so nervous. And of course, when you're nervous, you put things off. Of course, there's a point when you can't put off saying something like that. I don't know what I expected him to say or how I expected him to react. But like the phenomenal methodologist that he was, the first thing he said was, "How interesting. That's really going to impact on your data collection and how your respondents are going to respond to you." And of course he was right. It did change my fieldwork and my experience. Certainly it changed how my research respondents responded to me. But that wasn't the only impact of my pregnancy. Not planned, but my daughter arrived at the end, just right at the end, perfect timing, of my fieldwork year, end of year 2, stereotypically. And I thought, great, this is great. I'd be home anyway, writing up. And I'd already got 2 stepchildren I'd gone through university with and had all the work of those. They lived with me full time. So I thought, yeah, I know what all this is like. This is going to be fine. It's going to be a breeze. I've got through university, I can do this. Well, of course my daughter didn't sleep. The demands of 3 children between the age of 0 and 15 were pretty tremendous, let's say. So what did I do? Like all good PhD students in that situation, I went AWOL. I just disappeared. And of course, this was the days before, email, phones, everything else. God knows what Bob was thinking. But he never showed any sign of worry about completion rates, which actually was my big worry. So, as I eked my way back into trying to finish this PhD, I used to send him by post the most absolutely cringe-worthy drafts you could imagine. Absolutely awful. I'd die now to think about it. And they'd come back, with the red pen all over them. And the clock's ticking, tick, tick, tick. I've only got 4 months to go, and I'm going to be one of those who didn't complete. Luckily for me, Bob saw something in those awful drafts, and there was just a comment on one of the pages. And it said, "You seem to have a lot about mythology here." And of course the penny dropped. What that did was give me the framework for the thesis. And I got down to it in 3 months flat, wrote my PhD, handed it in. Thank you, Bob. And finally, cedar. And there is someone, Chris, who's in the room, who will know far more about cedar than I do, but my memories. I remember Bob talking about setting up cedar, the excitement, the ambition, the creation of the living embodiment of his intellectual commitments to research, methodology, and education. I remember him talking about the committees he had to go through. It was all gobbledygook to me. I hadn't got a clue, but I, got the gist. That he had to go through to get, to get permission to set this up. And there's just one thing I want to talk about that time, because I worked for CEDA for, 2-3 years on very short-term contracts. They could be for 10 days, they could be for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Very, very short-term contracts. But I want to talk about the values that Bob embodied and put in place into CEDA. First of all, responsibility for others. And there's just one example that has always stayed in my mind. And that was when he was talking about, for fixed-term staff, which in the sharp end of that kind of research centre endeavour is a common experience, contract end, and putting in place a period of time when contracts end, fundings end, but you could keep paying that person whilst they look for another contract or another job. And the second area is Bob was not one to stand on ceremony. He would muck in. And I had one piece of work I had to do, which was a piece of research in Salford on nursery education. And I was trying to write the report. I could not. Writing's always been a thing for me. Nothing would happen. And I remember Hilary, one bank holiday Friday, spending it all day in your house, whilst he sat with me and we thrashed out the body of this report. This was not a stand-away boss who just get on with it and sort it out. This was a fully engaged, caring human being. So, what better name of a building for generations to come who will learn and study and be engaged and enthused than the Sir Bob Burgess building. Thank you so much.
Okay. So as this is a teaching and learning building, I'm going to do this in the style of an undergraduate lecture. So you will need to pay attention because there will be questions as we go through. Okay. A preamble. For me, Bob isn't the hard hat wearing foundation digger that's been described. For me, Bob was the writer of the book Experiencing Comprehensive Education. That's my first encounter with him. Bob is a sociologist, an ethnographer of supreme quality that we all should read, we all should engage with. The second thing is that Bob, in his work, was so good at translating knowledge into practice, transcending those two, taking the things that we've learnt through research and applying it in the classroom and getting students to go on and apply it. And that's in no small part why I'm a professor of sociology and sociological practice. Sociology is a discipline, as Irving Goffman said, that we do. It's not something that we just read about, we do it. And Bob was a supreme doer of sociology. Now, you may have noticed my fashion statement. One of the things I like to do with undergraduates is I have T-shirts with book covers on to remind them of key books that they need to read. It's okay me standing here saying you need to read in the field. Wearing a T-shirt really reinforces that point. Okay. In my bag, I have a C. Wright Mills face mask. I've got various other badges, things like that. So anyway. But it's important because there are books that students should read. There are lots of books you can give or take, but there are books that are foundational, that are absolutely crucial in the education of any sociology undergraduate. So I'm going to talk a little bit about field work and practice. So I was aware of Bob and Bob's work before I came to Leicester. I had the good fortune to be taught by the methodologist Alan Bryman at Loughborough, who then coincidentally co-authored and edited with Bob, and Bob very shrewdly managed to bring to Leicester to the School of Management, as was. So I was aware of the books, I was aware of the knowledge. I mean, but I joined Leicester in 1991, before Bob started. I mean, I know I don't look that old, but I started here quite a long time ago. And when I heard that Bob was going to be the Vice-Chancellor, it was the themes and the debates in the books that excited me the most. The fact that we were going to have such a high quality sociologist here. As I said, I read Experiencing Comprehensive Education as an undergraduate. And what struck me was the detail, the rich detail, the focus on people and place. This is at a time, sociology as a discipline spent a long time writing people out of books, talking about abstract schema, of systems, of processes, and the people got lost. But here we had a book where the people are put back in. It's not an abstract theory book devoid of humanism. It's a book where the people are front and centre. Book about, kids like me who went to comprehensive schools. And it opened up this idea of a way of doing sociology that was different, that was immersive, that was detailed, that was about real people. So I was aware of that from the outset. And Bob became a major influence. So Henrietta will talk later about a project that we did where we found some field notes as part of it was a lost project. But very few people wrote about field notes in sociology. Very few people nobody wrote about how you analyse field notes, the notes that you take when you're doing research in the field, apart from one person, and that was Bob Burgess. The book In the Field is a seminal text. It's a text that all sociologists, anyone interested in field-based research should read. It's of a particular type, which is so rare in sociology. As I've said here, it's not prescriptive and sterile. It doesn't tell you how research, well caught there, how research should be. It tells you about how research is. It's the kind of nuts and bolts, the nitty-gritty, the lived reality of going out into the field and collecting data. Now, at the time, to my mind, there was only one other book that had the same quality, and that was C. Wright Mills's The Sociological Imagination, published in 1959. I know there are some sociologists in the room, so you can't answer this question. Who's heard of C. Wright Mills? Yes. Okay. You can have a sticker. There you go. As well as T-shirts, I do a line in stickers and badges. So what Mills does in his book, he provides, there's a chapter called On Intellectual Craftsmanship. And in that book, in that chapter, he basically provides an outline of how to do this thing that we call sociology. He tells the reader, start a file, start a diary, start to observe and record the things that you see in the world around you and reflect on those things. The next place where I see this advice is in Bob's book, In the Field. Start a diary, observe, record, reflect, and then repeat the process. Build up your stock of knowledge. Build up, it could be, like Mills, it's the things you see, the things you hear. It can be conversations overheard on a bus. It could be dreams. Whatever it is, it's collecting the material to stimulate your sociological imagination, and the material that you collect becomes data in its own right. So keep a file, keep a diary, observe the world around you, and turn that into data. So I said, there are not many books like this. Often the books that are there, they're quite sanitised, they're full of platitudes. But what sociologists actually need are the books on how to do this type of work. Whilst Bob was Vice-Chancellor, we used to invite him to come and talk to our doctoral students. And I think it was a really good thing to do because at that time, people were less interested in him as a sociologist and more interested in him as their boss or as the builder of the next building. So it was a real delight getting Bob to talk to students about the research at Bishop McGregor School, getting him to talk to them about collecting data, talking to them about the realities in the field. It was a revelation for some students that you could do interviews in a particular way. They don't have to follow the structured way that most textbooks say. What Bob advocated was interviews as conversations. Textbook writers have placed emphasis on the structured interview in the context of survey research. Here, there is no long-term relationship between the researcher and research. It is assumed that the interviewer can manipulate the situation and has control over a set list of questions. So what Bob goes on to advocate, actually, is a democratisation of the research process. This idea that you are engaging in a conversation with this other, with the respondent, and you can get the data that you need in a way that's not controlled, sterile, formal. He used to delight students also by saying, the notes that you take in your field notebook are also data. So when you're worrying about your 10,000 word dissertation, use that, quote yourself, quote your own notebooks. You will soon fill up the page. And it was really good advice, really good advice. So he talks about the methodological notes. So again, one of the things that we don't often do in the social sciences is talk about emotions. In methodological notes, Bob says, some notes dealt with problems, impressions, feelings, hunches, as well as the processes associated with being in the field. You don't get this from a standard methods textbook. Encouraging students to write about how they feel about doing the research, how they experience doing the research. So it's a seminal text. I'll be sending out the exam questions on this later in the semester, so I would recommend that you read it fairly soon. But not all, that's not all. Bob had the vision to produce a source book. So this book, the Field Research Source Book and Field Manual, pulls together kind of key readings and advice for students who are interested in doing this type of research. And as it says there, the review, Robert Burgess is to be congratulated on putting together such a useful collection and product. It's for teaching probably the best. Okay? The best. I don't think, and I think Christina would agree, I don't think it's been surpassed quite yet. So that's the second book on your reading list. Now it's important because this is knowledge, I say this is about the translation of work from the field into practical advice for students. The practical advice for students. And Bob, as we've already heard, was very keen on teaching. One of the most important conversations I had with Bob was about PhD supervision. And he said to me, you should be able to supervise any PhD. I've supervised PhDs from teachers to gas fitters and everything in between. And he had. And what he pointed to was this idea that as a researcher, you can supervise PhD students in many ways, on many grounds. It could be the substantive topic, it could be the methodology, it could be a practical question, it could be the data that's being used. Like Mills before him, what Bob didn't do was hide. There's a question for the academics amongst you. A lot of academics will say, oh, I can't supervise that. It's not my specialty. Bob was not like that. The best bit of advice he gave me was to think laterally, supervise a wide range of topics. So we've got it here again from Mills. There is the scientific posture of social investigators. They won't or they can't get beneath the official stereotypes. They favour such terms as specialty, used as in not my specialty, thus treating themselves as minor departments in the big department store. Bob was the department store. Bob did not hide behind this term. You could bring your expertise to a whole variety of topics and subjects, as I said, from teachers to gas fitters. It's advice that's so important for us as teachers, because by engaging with students outside of our specialty, we learn so much. We learn more about the doing. We learn more about how you apply the knowledge in a variety of different contexts. For me, Bob, as I said, the hard hat image of Bob is only one image. The other image is as a supreme field worker and somebody who could translate that experience into the classroom. Okay, now I'm going to hand on to Henrietta.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Christina and John are actually very hard acts to follow, so I will do my best. And what I want to talk about is Bob as a VC and a sociologist. So the focus today has been on his early career and on his career as a sociologist. I'm going to try and bring those two aspects of his life together and show how he continued to be a sociologist and also to be a VC, and also to carry on supporting people's careers and supporting people in their sociological and professional careers. So I'm going to pick up the story from where John left off, really, and talk about Bob's continued involvement in sociology. Many of you will know that he remained an editor of the International Journal of the Social Research Methods Journal throughout his time as a VC. I think that's quite unusual, to keep an active role in that level in the discipline. He was also the long-standing chair of trustees of the National Centre for Research Methodology, a post he held, I think, for 9 years, and he carried on doing that until 2021. So the point I want to make here is that he remained incredibly active in the field as well as a VC. I've called my session Approaching Retirement, and I've called it that for two reasons. One, because I'm going to talk about the period of his life as he approached retirement, but I'm also going to share with you a project that John and I led, which also focused on people approaching retirement, and which I think, I'm safe in saying, I think Bob liked this project and showed great interest in it, and he supported John and I through our careers in leading on this project. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this project because it sets the context for what I want to go on to talk about. So this project, some of you will know about this project. This is the Young Worker Project. It was a project that took place in Leicester in the early 1960s, and it focused on school leavers from Leicester who were born in the mid to late 1940s, who left school in Leicester between 1960 and 1964. The project, the original project, was led by the Department of Sociology at the University of Leicester, and it was led by a sociologist who became very well known, Norbert Elias. During the course of the project, some 900 school leavers in Leicester were interviewed in great detail by a team of researchers. They were asked about their experience at school in Leicester, their careers education, what they were told about careers in Leicester before they left school, and what they went on to do when they left school. So they were mostly interviewed for between a year and 4 years after they left school. The interviewers traced their career histories at that point. They asked them what they'd wanted to be when they were at school. They asked them what kind of jobs they'd gone into and what work was like for them. What was it like to work in a hosiery factory in Leicester? What was it like to work in a shoe factory? What did it mean to become an apprentice? What difference had school made to them? And Bob really liked this project. He often caught John and I on campus, asked us how it was going, because the project had two elements. One element was that originally in the 1960s, the project was lost. We're not sure whether it was lost deliberately or accidentally. There were a lot of questions over the funding of the project, and it was never written up. Everything was boxed up, 900 research interviews boxed up and put in literally in an attic office, which John, as a PhD student, then rediscovered. So we took these 900 interview schedules and we reanalysed them. We looked at what the experience of being a teenager in Leicester was in the 1960s. We quickly realised that each of these interview booklets had the name and address of the individual person in them 40 years later. So we picked up, at the time, a telephone directory. You probably wouldn't do it that way now. We looked in the telephone directory and we started to realise that the individuals interviewed 40 years earlier, many of them were still living in Leicester. They were approaching retirement, but yet still living in Leicester. So we started to write some letters, asking them if they'd be interested in being interviewed 40 years on. So it was, for us, it was a fantastic project. It's the project that keeps on giving. Even 20 years on from then, we still talk about the project a lot. We're very passionate about it. We learnt a lot about the history of Leicester, about the individual life courses in Leicester, about the history of sociology at Leicester. And Bob always was very interested in this for all of the reasons that Christina alluded to, about doing sociology in your own backyard, about understanding your own city, the city where the university is located. But one of the more interesting things about this project, if I've not captured your imagination enough already, was that when John discovered the boxes with the interview transcripts in, what also came to light were hundreds of documents about the project. So these were things like minutes from the project meetings. They were letters between the lead on the project and his predecessor. They were correspondence between team members. It was an absolute treasure trove of information. So I'm going to show you an example of just one of the letters. Oh, I need to go back one. I'll come back to what I just talked about. So one of the things we found were letters. This is a letter sent from Ilya Neustadt, who was head of the Department of Sociology, to Norbert Elias, who had gone on a kind of secondment to the University of Ghana. So the only way they could communicate about the project was by letter. The letters were very, very detailed. Any of you who work in academia would love reading this letter. You probably can't see much of it here. The things that were said in 1964, all of you who are heads of departments or have had experience of heads of departments would be saying the same things now. They talk about things like an unsuccessful staff seminar, the appointment of a new research assistant and whether that research assistant was performing well or not. But what we noticed were the comments in the margins, the notes in the margins, the additions to the letters. That was what we realised was actually telling us the true story of this project. It was the additions to the main data of the project. So we started to analyse this, and again, Bob's interest in this was he was absolutely fascinated by the fact that we had found this treasure trove of information, but also in how we were going to analyse it, how we were going to get to grips with all this additional data we were finding. So there was this data that wasn't part of the project, officially, but it was additional data. But what we also had were official pieces of data. So this handwritten piece on that side is the interviewer notes. So the interviewers who interviewed the 1960s school leavers were asked to reflect on their experience of interviewing each of the individuals. For sociologists today, for all of us probably in the audience, some of these comments are actually quite shocking. The highlighted bit talks about the respondent being sexy, having dishevelled hair, about her parents being very indulgent, about the house being tidy but not particularly well cared for. The girl looked a little wild, unkempt, sexy. What you see here is a shift from the social surveys that took place in sociology in the 1950s and 60s, the very dry tick box social surveys, to a much more ethnographic approach, to understanding more about the respondents, to reflecting on the respondents' lives in a way that wasn't in the interview schedule. Exactly what Christina and John were talking about, a very different approach to sociology. And I would argue that when Bob entered the field of sociology, this is the point where he came in, and his ethnographic work in the school in the 1970s started to change the face of British sociology. It picked up what we have here and ran with it and made sociology a very different discipline. Bob was very much at the forefront of this shift from one type of sociology to what we see today, much more what we see today. So we became really enthralled by this idea of what you can find out from looking around the edges of the project. What is in the margins of the data? What else can we discover that's not in the actual data that was collected for the project? And this led John and I to thinking about another project. And this new project we called Paradata, Marginalia and Field Notes. And we started to look at, had anyone else in the field of sociology or social sciences ever used this type of data before? Who was using it? And as John said earlier, Bob was really at the forefront of this, of stressing the importance of the field notes, the associated data. But we discovered another team were looking at similar work on another 1960s project. This was Ross Edwards at Southampton, who was also on an editorial board with Bob at the time. And Ross Edwards was doing a project where they had 1960s original data, and they'd noticed these comments at the side of the interview schedules that were telling them much more than the actual data was telling them. So we joined forces with Ross and Anne Phoenix, and we decided to hold a conference. And we happened to bump into Bob on campus when we'd planned this conference. And we took a chance and we asked him if he would come to the conference and if he would speak at this conference. So in January 2014, Bob agreed to come to our conference and introduce it. This was massive for us. We were absolutely thrilled to bits. He was approaching retirement. He was in the last stages of being a Vice-Chancellor, incredibly busy, but he agreed to come and introduce our conference. And I remember on the day, somebody in the audience tweeting at the moment when Bob walked in, "My God, they've got the top man in methods here today. This is amazing." And people were really impressed that he'd come. But actually he came because he was interested. He was fascinated by what we were doing and what this project was about. So it wasn't just about the notes in the margins. It went further than that. We also talked to people who do survey research, so computer scientists who look at paradata, which is the computer strokes that they collect when individuals are filling out surveys, and they can work out how people have answered the survey by how they touch the computer. I don't know. It becomes very quantitative, but it all comes together in this idea of paradata, marginalia, and field notes. And the other thing we've included in this collection, even though I say it myself, it's a lovely book. Have a look at it if you get a chance, because what else is in there? English scholars writing about the importance of notes in the margins of literary works and how important marginalia is in many different disciplines. And that was something, again, that Bob was very excited about with this project, was about the interdisciplinary nature of what was the potential from sociology to widen this out. So not only did he come to the conference and open the conference for us, somehow we also managed to persuade him to write the introduction to the whole book. So I have a very strong memory of him literally on his last day as VC, taking him all of the chapters printed out and delivering them to his doorstep, his office doorstep, when he was surrounded by everything else he was taking away with him. And I remember thinking, he won't have time to do this. He'll never remember to do it. I'm just giving him this envelope full of stuff. And of course, he produced the goods way ahead of the deadline. And the book's got a lovely, lovely introduction from Bob. So to end, I've got a short quote there from the foreword to the book, which really talks about the importance of different types of data and links back to what John talked about earlier, the importance that Bob attached to the bigger picture, to doing research in your own backyard, to looking at everything around you as a sociologist and bringing it all together. So to end, what I wanted to say really about Bob and to stress was his ongoing engagement with the discipline, and that was enduring throughout his career, despite the incredible challenges of being a VC and running the university in the way that he did. Secondly, his ongoing support for others. From his funeral service, the thing that was most striking was how everybody felt supported by Bob and looked after, and their careers supported. Despite his own busy life, he had time for everybody and to make sure everybody thrived. You can tell already that we were absolutely amazed and delighted that he agreed to introduce the conference, but I think that spurred us on to turn that conference into a book and to keep doing that research. All of this, along with John and Christina's reflections, are hallmarks for me of Bob's generosity of spirit and his enduring legacy. And I'm going to end with a quote from John, actually, something that John wrote in the Book of Condolence, that I want to end by saying that Bob was a top-rate sociologist, and I hope that that's what's come across to you all this afternoon. Thank you.
Wow, what a great afternoon. I hope you all enjoyed hearing all those reflections of Bob, and beautifully captured in all the speeches we had this afternoon. So my thanks to Bridget, obviously Hilary, Christina, John, and Henrietta. What you heard is a man not only had done so much to individuals in terms of their career development and their well-being and support, done so much to the discipline that he was passionate about, and also to the institution in the way he shaped the destiny of this institution. So that, I hope, is something I'm sure if he was here would be very proud to hear. And we are very fortunate to have had the opportunity to benefit from that in this university. So before I close, I just want to honor Hilary and Christina with a small gift. So if I could have Hilary come up, please. There's something else as well. Something easier to carry. And can I also have Christina? So that's it for this afternoon. I hope you enjoyed it. And obviously this will go to the front of the building later on. So it won't be here, it'll be in the front of the building so everybody can see. This is the Bob Burgess building. We have another event later on to open the whole site and have an opportunity to network as well. So if anybody able to join us, please do. But without further ado, thank you all very much for coming and being part of this opening this afternoon. Thank you, Hilary, and your family and friends for being here this afternoon. And guests, thank you all very much. Thank you.